Hello there and welcome to my series The Unfinished Arcs of Star Wars The Clone Wars. In this video we will be covering the 10th and final unfinished story arc, most commonly known as Return to Mon Cala, though it is more precisely a political story focusing on Padmé. Back in 2014, this was the 12th unfinished story arc, but due to the completion of Ahsoka's walkabout, the Bad Batch, and the Siege of Mandalore in 2020, it has now become the 10th and final unfinished story arc. Taking up production code 717 to 720, this story arc would have been the 4th story arc of the full 20 episode 8th and final season. Consisting of episodes 13 to 16, this story would have returned the narrative focus back to Padmé after her last main story was the 3 episode long Rush Clovis arc from 2 to 3 seasons earlier, and would have focused on Padmé's attempt to try and remove Palpatine from office after he has way outstayed his term. This story arc would have aired in the first few months of 2016 had production continued as planned. As the title suggests, this story arc would have involved Mon Cala within its plot. Sadly, the writer for this story arc was never officially confirmed. The major plot of this arc, as previously stated, was focused on Padmé trying to work against Chancellor Palpatine's prolonged stay in office. We have 2 Dave Filoni sketches associated with the plot of this story arc. Padmé hopes that she could get the Quarren's support with trying to remove Palpatine from office, with the first image from production episode 719, which is the 3rd episode of this story arc, showing Padmé and Anakin return to Mon Cala. They are greeted by King Lee Char, who is standing on a giant sea creature. Lee Char no longer trusts the Republic due to what happened with Ahsoka in Season 5. Padmé and Anakin are informed that the Quarren leader, No Sari, has been murdered, with Tiki's being made provisional leader in his place. The second image shows us that the Quarren city would have appeared in this story arc, showing us that the Quarren live above the waters while the Mon Cala live underneath. Padmé and Anakin meet him with Tiki's, hear him express his frustrations with Palpatine, with Quarren Senator Tundra Dalmir exclaiming the Republic is gridlocked and is not able to function in its current state. There is also an image of the development of this arc with George Lucas, and who is presumably the writer of this story arc, writing sections of the plot for production episode 719, suggesting that Lucas worked very closely with the writer on this story. At the time of the show's cancellation in March 2013, this was one of 6 story arcs alongside Return to the Jedi, Saving Voss, Rex and R2 Top Gun, The Yuuzhan Vong, and The Siege of Mandalore that only had draft scripts written for it. This is due to being a part of the 7th production season that sadly never got any visual development for it, beyond sketches by Dave Filoni during the early story sessions phase. Unlike the previous 2 unfinished story arcs, we actually have more than one Dave Filoni sketch released to us, with us having the previously mentioned 2 that are associated with the plot chosen for this story arc before the show's cancellation. Tiki's was originally slated to appear in the season 4 episode Prisoners, but was cut from the final version of the episode due to not fitting in. While being cut, Tiki's inclusion got to at least the design stage of development. If this story arc was to be finished, they could use this design as a basis for his appearance in this story. Before this story arc was settled on, there was an earlier pitched idea that would have the final arc of the Clone Wars be Padmé and Ahsoka teaming up, with Padmé being the one to figure out how to end the Clone Wars. The Battle of Coruscant was then set into motion as a last-ditch effort by Palpatine to continue his plans. This idea was rejected by Lucas, however, when he brought up Padmé's pregnancy, preventing her from being able to pull off the action sequences required for this story, which led to the Padmé and Ahsoka stories being separated. This earlier version had Padmé go through a bunch of challenges to gain an audience with the Separatist Council, and paralleling what her daughter Leia did in Return of the Jedi. This is where the sketch of Padmé and her Naboo speeder originates from. The 2023 Ahsoka show documentary, Master and Apprentice, showed us an image of Dave Filoni sketching the image of the Quarren City with Padmé and Anakin's meeting with Tiki's. What this has to do with either subject matter of the origins of the Clone Wars or Ahsoka herself, I have no idea, as this is literally a sketch for an unfinished arc that relies on pre-established characters, as well as Ahsoka not even publicly known to have even been featured in this story arc, beyond being mentioned. While the writer of this arc was never officially confirmed, it's likely they decided to use the same writers that they used in the previous 6th production season for the 7th production season. Due to the process of elimination with previous story arcs, I have come to the conclusion that the head writer for the last 2 Clone Wars production seasons, Matt Michnovetz, wrote Return to Mon Cala, with it being the penultimate arc of the Clone Wars, which would be his solo write for the final production season, after also solo writing the Bounty Hunter arc for production season 5, and the Kashyyyk arc for production season 6. This would also make sense considering it seems Lucas worked closely on the Kashyyyk arc too, as it focused on aspects he had created since the original trilogy days, with Lucas also being the one who named the characters of Bubwa Venomore and Major Claus Itto. To add to that, this story arc essentially acts as the end to the Clone Wars political stories, being the other half of the show's ending before the Siege of Mandalore ended the story for the conflict side of the show. Not to mention that this story arc's early ideas was going to be the final Clone Wars story arc, with them most likely originally assigning the final arc to the head writer before they had to split it into 2 and give Dave Filoni his first solo credit with the Siege of Mandalore, possibly due to it being both the end of the show and them needing another writer quickly. Due to George Lucas's closer involvement with this story particularly, I can't help but think that this story arc has to do with the Delegation of 2000. A deleted scenes plot from Revenge of the Sith that focused on Padmé and other senators like Bail Organa and Mon Mothma, who are concerned with Palpatine's continued use of emergency powers. This story arc would have essentially allowed that Delegation of 2000 plot to finally breathe separately from all the events that happened in Revenge of the Sith. This comes with a potential downside that they might have played more loose with the whole timeline of the Delegation, and possibly retconned parts of the Revenge of the Sith novelization. Due to this Delegation of 2000 plot, I think it's most likely that a majority of the senators from throughout the show could have returned, from the previously stated Bail Organa and Mon Mothma to other potential characters seen throughout the Senate, including Jar Jar Binks, C-3PO, and maybe even Senator Chuchi. It's also possible we'd have seen Padmé travel to other places before Mon Cala to try to convince them to sign the Delegation, maybe even having her return to Naboo. Anakin's inclusion in this story arc could have caused more friction between him and Padmé, considering Anakin's close relationship with the Chancellor, causing them to clash over their opposing views on the situation, considering Padmé wants to oust Palpatine from office. Ahsoka's trial and what happened with the Banks in the Rush Clovis arc could be factors into Padmé's decision to try and oust Palpatine, showing her souring taste for his actions over the course of the war come to a head. One of the unknown aspects of this arc is who the villains will be. I think it's most likely that Palpatine would have wind of Padmé's plans and get his minions to disrupt her process in getting support for the Delegation, possibly even getting Grievous or Dooku to do his dirty work again, just like he did during the Season 3 episode Heroes on Both Sides. It's possible they would have been involved with the murder of No Suri, if not for Tikis himself, who could have been frustrated with No Suri's loyalty to Palpatine, and being a member of the Separatist Council would see the Republic as corrupt, with him maybe murdering No Suri in secret, allowing him the power to take over and remove the Quarren from the Republic. One aspect I think we'd have seen in this story arc is to do with Padmé's pregnancy, with Padmé discovering for herself that she is pregnant, but she either decides to not tell Anakin about this, or he might have already left for the Outer Rim sieges before she has the chance to. Further to this, an idea brought up during the development of Revenge of the Sith was that Padmé's pregnancy would have caused her to have a higher connection to the Force, due to the high midichlorian count of the twins, this causing her to have Force vision nightmares and also be able to levitate objects around her. I can see this idea being somewhat repurposed in this story arc, to essentially give Padmé a slightly higher sense of intuition that could have been used to help her discover the resolution to the murder of No Suri and the story arc's overall plot. Originally, this story arc was most likely set to be the last one before the Siege of Mandalore, implying that we'd have actually skipped over the Outer Rim sieges with the original versions of the Bad Batch and Kashyyyk arcs, not intended to be a part of them, before the final season pushed those two arcs and Ahsoka's walkabout forward in the timeline. This would most likely now place this story arc right before Ahsoka's walkabout, with Anakin saying goodbye to Padmé before leaving for the Outer Rim sieges at the end of this arc, to preparing to leave with Admiral Yularen in Walkabout. It is also possible that Anakin would further lament Ahsoka's absence in this story arc. This would especially come into play when talking with Lee Char, who formed a bond with Ahsoka during the Battle of Mon Cala and has a resentment towards the Republic for turning their backs on her. If this arc is ever finished, this could be focused on more now, as we know even if the Sith Shrine arc still did happen with Ahsoka, she'd most likely leave again for one reason or another, leading her to meet the Martez sisters later on than was the original plan for Ahsoka's walkabout, when it included Nix Okami and was set before this story. It's possible this story arc could have featured the return of Lux Bonteri, with him now being the Republic Senator of Onderon, which would harken back to the Battle of Onderon arc from Season 5. This could have potentially given us an insight into what Lux thinks of what the Republic did to Ahsoka. Due to the death of Tekla in the Rush Clovis arc, it's possible we'd have gotten cameos from Padmé's Revenge of the Sith handmaidens, if not from Sabe herself. The Clone Wars sadly never got as far as to fully set up and show the Separatist Council we see in Revenge of the Sith. Maybe this story arc would have finally shown us that, with Tiki's potentially being a representative of them that agrees to speak with Padmé due to her actions with wanting to oust Palpatine. The Separatist Council was mentioned all the way back during the development of Season 4, where it was stated that Lucas wanted to separate the Trade Federation seen in previous seasons from the CIS, as they were meant to be the middlemen in the war who would later fully join the CIS by the time of Revenge of the Sith. Maybe this story arc would have also shown that event, finally depicting the Trade Federation fully sided with the CIS publicly. As Palpatine gains more and more under the Republic, including his acquisition of the banks in the Rush Clovis arc, the Separatists would have become the main enemy against him. Padmé's relationship with Mon Mothma could have been an aspect this story arc expanded on. Mon was supposedly Padmé's mentor, though this dynamic didn't really get much focus, with there not seemingly being much reference by Mon or Bail about Padmé post her death, despite her being set up by Lucas as the mother of the rebellion. Due to this story arc most likely being the last on-screen story for Padmé, it's also possible that we could have seen her family on Naboo explored a bit more, something which was also a part of deleted scenes from the prequel trilogy. They could somehow tie into the plot, maybe Palpatine's actions as Chancellor somehow affecting her family's life, aided to her want to remove him from office. Other possibilities could be that they finally brought Panaka into the Clone Wars, harkening back to a plan they had to bring him into the Malevolence arc, which never came to pass due to the issues with creating too many character models during the production of the first season. They could have also featured Naboo Queen Apolana from Revenge of the Sith, who was played by Keisha Castle Hughes, who has since gone on to voice Emery Carr in The Bad Batch. This story arc could have ended with Palpatine fully declaring war against the CIS, after he has now gained enough power in the Republic, making the Republic invade more neutral territory like they did at the end of the Rush Clovis arc. This could be what triggers the Outer Rim sieges, which itself could also be part of Palpatine's plan to get Anakin away from Padmé, considering he's probably on to her attempts to oust him from office, as well as tire out the rest of the Jedi. This would essentially make it impossible and put the final nail in the coffin for Padmé's attempts at peace talks, with Palpatine painting all the Separatists as evil, using the Trade Federation's invasion of his homeworld as justification, when in reality, we know there are heroes on both sides, as stated in both the Revenge of the Sith title crawl and previous episodes of the Clone Wars. This act by Palpatine could be what ultimately causes the Trade Federation to fully join the Separatists, as the Republic could 100% turn against them and force them out. Palpatine preaching that he is the only trustworthy person to be able to hold the power he has amassed, manipulating the Republic against the outside organisations. Anakin could actually be visiting Mon Cala with Padmé on the behalf of the Chancellor, secretly feeding info back to him, with Anakin working with Palpatine being something we didn't see much of in the Clone Wars. This would sow the seeds for their dynamic in Revenge of the Sith. Padmé could have had another Liberty Dies moment at the end of the arc, and it's most likely her short-term attempts in this story arc would be all for naught due to how Palpatine is successful in Revenge of the Sith. The story arc as a whole most likely showing us how Padmé is ultimately unable to do anything, as the amount of power Palpatine has by this point in the timeline essentially makes him the Emperor already in all but name. Palpatine has become the entire Senate. The main change from this story arc's draft is the fate of No Siree. Thanks to the Resistance Allegiance comic, it is now stated that No Siree survived until the sequel trilogy era. Personally, I don't think this means the entire arc is now not canon or not possible, as some people say, because it's still possible for No Siree to be taken out of action in this story arc by other means. Maybe he has an attempt on his life that puts him into a coma. This way, Teges would still be appointed provisional leader in his place. Another possible retcon is Vader saying he hasn't been to Mon Cala since the battle in Season 4, but this can also be disregarded, as him going with Padmé would be something he could have done behind the Chancellor's back, or betrayed Padmé's confidence by secretly reporting to Palpatine, as well as it being something he'd not want to remember due to how it involved his now dead wife, something Vader probably doesn't want to focus on. Both of these supposed retcons don't even have to be taken into account, as when both of these stories were made, this story arc was clearly never considered to ever be finished. But if in the future it is decided that they do want to go back and finish it, I doubt they'd let comics from years gone by affect that. Also, I doubt that No Siree dying in the unfinished arc, as well as Vader saying he hasn't been back to Mon Cala, are core part of their respective stories anyway, as they can be altered in such a way that has no effect on the overall plot. This is like how they've changed elements of other comic and novel stories in animated projects released since, such as the first episode of The Bad Batch changing aspects of the Kanan comic, and the Ahsoka novel story having its outline repurposed for Tales of the Jedi Episode 6. I will also note that this story would have had changes made to it had it been fully developed beyond its draft script anyway, as no story, even the ones that were finished in the original production, have zero changes from their initial draft scripts. Things always get altered and tweaked as they go down the development track, which no doubt this story arc would have had done back in the original production had it not been cancelled, and would definitely do if it is ever finished now. With the canon being described as a mythology and the 2014 statement of everything is canon most likely being a marketing stunt, I personally think headcanon is the best way to go, with this unfinished story deserving the chance to be released, despite it potentially being slightly altered, or it altering a few minor elements from other stories. Personally, with this being one of the story arcs we know the least about, it makes me want it more, with it finally giving us an on-screen Padmé-focused story for what would be the first time in over a decade. It would also potentially allow the Delegation of 2000 story the chance to be released on screen, after seemingly being cancelled twice, as well as set up a bunch of political elements that we see in Revenge of the Sith. Being another one of the least known story arcs also makes this essentially a new Clone Wars story to pretty much everyone. With how major of a story it seems to be, with it ending the political arc of the Clone Wars, it is in my opinion one of the most important story arcs for a character that existed before the Clone Wars show, due to how it seems to essentially rectify Padmé's unfortunate reduced role in Revenge of the Sith. I believe this story arc would make either a good second to last arc of a Clone Wars spin-off show that would complete all 40 episodes, or be a good animated 90-minute Clone Wars special that would give Padmé some time in the limelight after not being a major screen presence since the Rush Clovers arc all the way back in 2014. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment. Until the next time, goodbye.